Every year, the Cali Cartel spent a staggering $1 billion on bribes, enough to buy anything and everything they could possibly need. Let's just say, if violence could be avoided.
Operation Sea Chase was a multi-agency task force to prosecute the biggest money launderers of the Medellin cartel. Most of the people I dealt with were high-level drug traffickers. I spent a year and a half putting together what I think is one of the more sophisticated fronts used in undercover. I built the persona of Robert Musella. I addressed the...
According to the DEA, the Cali Cartel was the most powerful criminal organization in history, surpassing even Medellin.
I was embedded in an investment company, a mortgage brokerage business, and even a brokerage firm with a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. And then I and my partner began a 2-year infiltration.
Infiltrating Wall Street gave the cartel a legitimate seat at the financial table, making their laundered funds virtually untraceable. While public attention focused on the violent exploits of the Medellin cartel, a more insidious syndicate was quietly establishing a financial empire. This was the Cali Cartel, an organization that prioritized corporate corruption over street-level warfare.
When we think of a Colombian cartel, the Medellin cartel is usually the first to come to mind. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, one of its key founders, is undoubtedly the reason for this. However, during the 1980s and 1990s, there was another cartel just as influential as Medellin, the Cali Cartel. Unlike Escobar's organization, the Cali Cartel was known for favoring corruption over bloodshed.
By prioritizing institutional bribery, these ex-accountants realized they could buy political and financial systems far more easily than they could conquer them by force. Navigating the high-stakes world of international trafficking requires more than raw force. It demands a deep understanding of underground logistics and corporate compliance. Experienced operators soon realized that moving illicit commodities at scale was ultimately a complex business management challenge.
My name is Peter Tritton, aka Posh Pete. I smuggled over £5 million worth of cocaine internationally. This is how crime works. I've been in prison with people there, capos from the Sinaloa cartel, bosses from the Colombian cartels.
Surviving in this landscape meant rubbing shoulders with elite capos who ran their criminal enterprises like Fortune 500 companies. Legitimate accountants often face intense skepticism when explaining how massive street operations were actually financed. The true battle for market dominance wasn't just fought in the alleys, but through sophisticated distribution networks that bypass traditional surveillance.
For a long time, I've been having people ask me, you know, you've had Wildman on your podcast and he's got this massive playlist, but where's all your other co-defendants? Some people even saying, you're making all this up. You guys didn't even do all this extra traffic in Arizona, blah, blah. You were never in competition with Sammy the Bull, blah, blah, blah.
Proving the scale of these operations requires exposing the complex corporate networks that lay hidden beneath the surface of everyday commerce. Undercover operations have repeatedly revealed that the true weapon of global cartels is not firepower, but dirty capital. The systematic laundering of massive cash reserves allows criminal organizations to infiltrate and compromise legitimate democratic institutions.
My name is Robert Mazer. I spent 2 years undercover laundering tens of millions of dollars for Pablo Escobar's cartel. This is how crime works. Money laundering enables cartels to produce the most lethal thing that they produce around the world, and that's corruption. It enables them to be able to control countries, presidents of countries.
When money laundering is executed perfectly, it buys the ultimate commodity: absolute institutional immunity and state control. Establishing trust with overseas processing nodes requires presenting a flawless professional front that guarantees operational security. For financial orchestrators, keeping supply chains humming is a highly structured mathematical process.
Sí tenemos una muy amiga y elemento nosotros que nos ha tocado perder por el camino, pero igual no nos pesa y sabemos que en esto andamos y si morimos en esto, pues...
In the underworld, absolute confidence in the lack of errors are the only metrics that guarantee a long-term business relationship. The evolution of international drug cartels is deeply intertwined with how regulatory bodies and federal agencies chose to label and target these emerging syndicates. These official classifications would ultimately shape the strategies of both the law enforcers and the launderers.
So the story I tell, and I'm a protagonist of the story, of the Medellin cartel, was that one day, 1980, the almighty powerful DEA and the U.S. Department of Justice baptized.
Understanding this structural conflict requires looking back to the exact moments when federal enforcement strategies inadvertently reshaped cartel operations. On the front lines of the border networks, keeping watch over key terrain is critical to avoiding federal patrols and moving valuable cargo. Cartels rely on systemic corruption, systematically paying off local checkpoints, and border personnel to guarantee smooth passage.
10 was like our wild, wild west days out here where we were in chases every day.
And what are the odds someone has eyes on us right now?
Oh, pretty good, dude, because these are all scout hills.
At what age would you say you officially joined an organization?
Since I was about 10, 11 years old.
We spoke with a cartel member last night that alleged that one of the ways it gets through is paying off Border Patrol, paying off police.
The system is designed to catch the amateur smugglers, while the professional networks simply by the compliance of the gatekeepers. Operating with corporate precision, the Cali Cartel treated bribery as a standard operational expense, allocating over $1 billion annually to purchase systemic protection. This massive financial leverage allowed them to corrupt key figures at the highest echelons of government.
Cartel was known for favoring corruption over bloodshed. After all, why resort to violence when you can literally have the Colombian president in your pocket? Every year, the Cali Cartel spent a staggering $1 billion on bribes, enough to buy anything and everything they could possibly need. Let's just say if violence could be avoided, they did so. Instead of eliminating potential threats, they bought their silence, ensuring their illegal activities stayed out of the spotlight.
When your annual bribery, despite the multi-million-dollar paydays, the pressure of maintaining a massive illicit enterprise breeds constant paranoia and internal threats, the life of a high-level financial operator is a continuous calculation of risk, where one bad trade can lead to total ruin.
And even when they were in their heyday, making millions, the amount of fear and paranoia that they had to contend with, people trying to kill them, people trying to take their business from them, and in the end, what did they end up with? They ended up going to prison for a long time and losing all of it pretty much. I am extremely lucky to be alive.
In this business, the ultimate price of success is often a lifetime of paranoia followed by a long prison sentence. Or worse. To understand the global reach of these networks, we must look to the urban financial hubs where street syndicates and corporate operators cross paths. These high-level alliances would ultimately provide the infrastructure for washing cartel funds.
Guest here today from New York after John Elite, the Gambino hitman, who we published a month or so ago.
The intersection of traditional organized crime and modern corporate laundering creates a highly complex financial web that is incredibly difficult to untangle. Confronted with the cartel's financial dominance, federal authorities launched Operation Sea Chase, a historic multi-scene task for targeting high-level money launderers. The stakes were incredibly high, as these financial agents managed hundreds of millions of dollars.
Operation Sea Chase was a multi-agency task force to prosecute the biggest money launderers of the Medellin cartel. Most of the people I dealt with were high-level drug traffickers who had hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm doing this interview in silhouette because two agencies and an intelligence agency informed me that the Medellin cartel issued a contract on my life.
Going after the money of the world's most powerful syndicates is a lethal assignment, often carrying a direct contract on your life. Successfully navigating a complex cross-border financial pipeline requires precise execution and timing at every step of the transit route. When the funds are safely processed and the accounts settled, the relief among high-level operators is undeniable.
Tenemos una muy amiga y elemento de nosotros que nos ha tocado perder por el camino, pero igual no nos pesa y sabemos que en esto.
In the high-risk world of money laundering, making it to the finish line without getting flagged is the ultimate professional victory. At the base of the global supply chain thousands of low-level distributors struggle to funnel their products to buyers in the United States. While they face the brunt of law enforcement, the true masterminds are building far more sophisticated financial loops.
Thousands, literally, of small-time narcos wanted to sell cocaine to their customers or buyers in the United States for dollars. Many humans use the one-liner, having your private island is like a dream.
Street-level trafficking generates massive piles of physical cash, but the real magic is turning that green paper into legitimate electronic wealth. While Western nations grapple with the devastating influx of synthetic drugs across their borders, the underlying mechanics of this trade remain deeply tied to international logistics and cash flows.
Power is American guns. Now, as Americans, we get mad about the fentanyl flooding across our border.
The border crisis is a dual flow system. Illicit goods head north, while clean corporate assets and weapons flow straight back south, operating under the guise of legitimate business. Executives, the leaders of the Cali Cartel, carefully cultivated an image of corporate respectability. However, behind their quiet demeanor lay a ruthless willingness to deploy extreme force whenever their financial empire was threatened.
No wonder they were nicknamed the Gentlemen of Cali. But don't be fooled into thinking they were saints. They may have operated discreetly, but they didn't shy away from using force to command respect. This empire, built on drug trafficking, was led by 4 kingpins.
They were called the Gentlemen of Cali because they preferred the pen to the sword, but they kept the sword close at hand. The physical creation of the product begins in the remote regions of South America, far from the polished offices of Wall Street. Raw leaves are harvested in rural locations before being transported to hidden laboratories for chemical refinement.
Cocaine is farmed and produced in Peru, Bolivia, and Colombia. The farms will generally be in rural locations out in the countryside where they will grow the coca bushes. They will crop the coca leaves. They will then be taken to another location, which is the laboratory where they will process the leaves.
This rustic, agricultural start is the origin of a multi-billion-dollar supply chain that eventually corrupts the cleanest banks in the world. When law enforcement finally intercepts a distribution node, the takedown is sudden and aggressive, resulting in mass arrests that sweep up dozens of co-defendants at once. These operators are quickly funneled into high-security regional holding facilities.
Look out the peephole, it's blacked out. Tempe Police Department, we got a warrant, open the door, open the door. Now, I had about 200 people working for me at the peak of it, and they arrested the co-defendants in order of seniority. And there was about 100 co-defendants ended up in Sheriff Joe Arpaio's jail. And we're going to get to the female experience in Sheriff Joe Arpaio's jail in this podcast.
For low-level runners, the transition from counting millions to sitting behind bars happens in the blink of an eye. To compromise high-level financial institutions, undercover federal agents had to construct incredibly sophisticated front identities. This required posing as wealthy, jet-setting investors with legitimate corporate holdings, luxury vehicles, and thriving retail chains.
I spent a year and a half putting together what I think is one of the more sophisticated fronts used in undercover. I built the persona of Robert Musella. I dressed the part, certainly had the lifestyle, drove a Rolls-Royce, Mercedes, Jaguar. I was embedded in real businesses. Had an air charter service with a private jet. We had a jewelry chain with 30 locations on the East Coast.
Infiltrating Wall Street and the high-stakes game of corporate money laundering. The margin for error is not existent. A single missed detail or delayed wire transfer can instantly trigger devastating consequences for the entire operation. Financial networks are fragile, and when one link fails, the fallout is swift and absolute. Media representations often glamorize or oversimplify the brutal realities of cartel history, turning complex financial conspiracies into mere entertainment. The actual history of these syndicates reveals a cold-blooded pragmatism where any threat to the business was permanently neutralized.
Netflix, they made a comedy about the cartel, and they placed me, and I see it with my own eyes, with the swastika on my arm. Well, that is reprehensible. That should have never happened. And they killed everything, including the dog.
Real-world organized crime, uncovering the massive logistical pipeline between international operators and domestic syndicates requires mapping out complex trade routes. These operations survive by exploiting bureaucratic loopholes and utilizing advanced transport methods.
Into Mexico. In this episode, we expose the pipeline, from cartel operators to U.S. gun smugglers running thousands of firearms across the border to the law enforcement agents fighting to stem the flow. These folks are the players in this deadly supply chain of power and violence. And would you believe that some of our own three-letter agencies might be involved? This is the story of how American guns end up in the hands of Mexican cartels.
The system is a massive industrial machine where commodities flow in one direction and the untraceable cash flows back out. Historically, the Cali Cartel emerged as an absolute powerhouse, eventually controlling the vast majority of the global market. Led by a highly organized board of directors, they built an empire so massive that it surpassed even Pablo Escobar's organization in sheer economic influence.
Led by four kingpins, the two Rodriguez Orejuela brothers, Gilberto and Miguel, Jose Santa Cruz Lodonio, known as Chepe, and Elmer Herrera, alias Pacho. According to the DEA, the Cali Cartel was the most powerful criminal organization in history, surpassing even Medellin.
Their power wasn't based on physical terror, but on a silent corporate monopoly that reached the highest levels of global finance. At the raw production level, the profit margins are staggering. Farmers are paid very little for backbreaking labor in the fields, while the refined product undergoes a massive markup as it moves through secure shipping, ports toward international markets.
It's the laboratory where they will process the leaves. The cocaine, once it's been processed in the lab, will be transported to probably down to the coast normally, or to the ports, or also the capital, should we say, for sale. The farmers themselves are paid quite poorly. They have to farm an acre of bushes for 1 kilo of cocaine.
The true financial exploitation occurs at the top of the chain, where dirty billions are transformed into clean corporate investments. When federal prosecutors crack down on these massive operations, they often frame the case as a victory over the masterminds of the conspiracy. Yet, behind the scenes, the highly insulated leadership is already establishing new structures to keep the assets flowing.
Get to the female experience in Joe Arpaio's jail in this podcast. Now, in the first group of co-defendants, there was 13, and they said these are the heads of the crime family, the most powerful people in the criminal syndicate.
Didn't you do well?
The top of the conspiracy, the evil leaders of the criminal enterprise. And on that day we were busted.
Prosecuting the low-level runners is easy, but dismantling the hidden financial board of directors is a much harder challenge. To wash billions of dollars in street cash ex-cartel, accountants utilized businesses that naturally handled high cash volumes like the New York Diamond District. By blending these operations with legitimate Wall Street brokerages and mortgage firms, they successfully bypassed regulatory red flags.
Locations on the East Coast, a lot of cash goes through the Diamond District every single day. So if you've got those kinds of businesses, you have a very good excuse for where the cash came from. I was embedded in an investment company, a mortgage brokerage business, and even a brokerage firm with a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. And then I and my partner began a 2-year infiltration of the Medellin cartel and the banks that were supporting them.
Infiltrating Wall Street gave the cartel a legitimate seat at the financial table, making their laundered funds virtually untraceable. Successfully executing a high-stakes corporate takeover in the financial markets requires flawless coordination among all conspirators. When a Multi-million-dollar transaction settles without alerting regulators. The relief within the network is immense.
Tenemos una muy amiga y elemento de nosotros que nos ha tocado perder por el camino, pero igual no nos pesa y sabemos que en esto andamos y si morimos.
In this high-stakes business, completing a successful clean run is the only goal that keeps the machinery moving forward. The evolution of modern money laundering was paved by pioneering traffickers who built the early distribution pipelines. Understanding how these massive operations scaled up requires analyzing the historic figures who first integrated street cash with global banking systems.
Now, this is one of the most fascinating interviews I've done in 25 years as a journalist. Carlos Launder. A lot of you know who he is, but this is one of the biggest cocaine traffickers of all time.
These early pioneers laid the groundwork for a financial infrastructure that would eventually corrupt the entire Wall Street system. In the upper echelons of financial organized crime, a single bad business transaction can lead to immediate and fatal consequences. Operating at this level requires an absolute disregard for personal safety and cold focus on the bottom line.
Oh yeah, most of the people I know just either their people either got hit by, one of the three people that were going out. I don't fear for my life.
When dealing with billions in cartel funds, the risk isn't just losing your license, it's losing your life. Controlling nearly 90% of the global market. The Cali syndicate's annual revenue soared to a staggering $20 billion. This massive financial accumulation fueled an all-out corporate war against their Midland rivals, permanently reshaping the international banking landscape.
90% of the cocaine trade to the United States and nearly 80% to Europe. And their annual revenue, it soared to as much as $20 billion. But having Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel as their main rival during that era was no walk in the park. This rivalry escalated into an all-out war between 1988 and 1993, unleashing an unprecedented wave of violence across the country.
When $20 billion a year is at stake, the battle for market dominance moves from the street straight into the global financial system, refining raw materials into highly profitable global commodities requires securing massive quantities of tightly controlled chemical precursors by exploiting regulatory gaps and manipulating supply chains. Cartel accountants ensured their processing hubs remained fully operational.
The cocaine is processed. I know in Peru you can buy it for as little as, should we say, $700 up to $1,200 for a kilo. The chemicals that we needed to buy in order to process the cocaine were quite difficult to get because they were controlled. Things like methanol, which is a pure alcohol, hydrochloric acid, sulfuric acids, activated carbon, acetone.
The chemical supply chain is just as complex as the financial one, requiring precise manipulation of global trade rules to keep the factories running. When $20 billion a year is at stake, the battle for market dominance moved from the street straight into the global financial system.